All right.
Take two.
Take two.
Take two.
3, 2, 1.
Hello, my name is Eric J. Garcia, and this is Sixto Fidel, and we're both members of IGC, Instituto Grafico de Chicago. And we're here today to talk a little about what's going on this month. In normal times, if it wasn't for the pandemic, we'd be gearing up for our annual print festival, Grabadolandia, which is a 3-day event, normally towards the end of November. It happens every year in Chicago at the National Museum of Mexican Art. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic, this year we had to do something different. We're now having a virtual Grabadolandia, which means instead of having all these different printmakers and artists come to Chicago, we're doing virtual studio visits, and we're putting them all online, and we're going to debut them on November 26, 27, 28. Now, the other thing that we're doing differently this year is we're having an internal print portfolio among the IGC members. So the theme of the print portfolio was to be creating during the time of the pandemic, and what does that mean, and what household items could we possibly use, because we know a lot of people out there want to make prints, but they can't go outside, or they can't have access to all the supplies or they're normally printing with. So our challenge to ourselves was to find things that are at our everyday use and our normal readily available household things that could excuse him, that we would normally find in our everyday house that we could possibly use for printmaking. So what I've been finding more and more is I have more and more cardboard because I'm eating a lot of cereal during the pandemic. And what I basically did is I made I dissected the cardboard cereal box. Excuse me, let me have this little guy over. Thank you. And I broke the cereal box down, and I created a giant stencil. So as you can see, this old Cheerio box, I carved out my lettering and created a stencil, which was going to be one plate. The second plate is going to be the background image, which is this giant sunburst image. So I'm using the natural folds of the box itself to create these two different flaps that are going to go over each other and create a single image once they're printed layered on top of each other. If there's silk screeners out there, you're going to understand what I'm doing, because it mimics the spider, the octopus press, where there's multiple arms with multiple silk screen frames going and layering on top of each other. So the other household element is trying to find some kind of color to print with, some kind of ink. My smart sister-in-law, Sara Cortez, had the idea. She said you should use turmeric, and lo and behold, turmeric is an excellent way to get a very nice vibrant yellow. So I just add some water, put some turmeric, and twist it up, and that's going to be our base color for the sunburst. And then I've been playing around with beet juice, and using this as as another form of another color to be inking with. So I boiled some, I crushed it, and that's going to be my magenta that I'm going to use for my second color. Now let's see how this works. Now I'm going to open up the press, and you see that I have a registration marks inside it. This is going to allow me to make sure that my paper is positioned exactly the same spot every time. This is going to make sure, or actually going to ensure that my print is in the same spot every time. So these always go down at the same spot every time. And this is going to create my multiple. Now I'm going to do my first layer is going to be my yellow. And this can be done with whatever little container, adding some water to your turmeric, because this is what I had in my house. And there's all kinds of different ways to make different types of pigments. You can experiment with all kinds of different types of vegetables or coffee stains, all kinds of different ways to make different colors. You could do what I'm doing with a paper towel and just blot the whole thing, but I have a paintbrush here, so I'm going to do this rather quickly so you get the general idea. And I'm just using this stencil as a way of blocking out the image. So I'm painting the interior, the negative space, and the positive space is going to already be automatically blocked out for me. Now the turmeric does get a little grainy, but once it dries, you just wipe that grain off and you can see it has a nice yellow color towards it. Put that to the side. I open up my fold and you can see you already have your nice, very graphically cut out sunburst. Now I'm going to put this to the side, let it dry, and just like a cooking show, I already have one baked for you. I'm going to put this back in position and we can do our second layer. Again, using that natural fold of the box to make our flap go over, secured down with tape to make sure that they're not moving anywhere else that I need them. And again, the stencil is already cut out. I cut it out with an X-Acto knife prior to prep for this. And your images don't have to be this extensive or this complicated. It could be even simpler if you wanted to. This gives you an idea how it's done. Now the first time I saw this process was around like 4 or 5 years ago at the Art Institute in Chicago. There was a mass exhibition, huge exhibition of Soviet propaganda. Now during the 50s and 60s, the Soviets were utilizing anything and everything they had, and they were pretty limited in what their supplies were. But they were using these giant stencils, and they were stencils just like this, but made of wood. And they were using paint to paint in between them to create multiples of giant propaganda posters. And so they weren't using ink per se; they were using paints. But it was the same idea because they wanted to create multiples, and this was a fast, easy way for Soviets to get multiples made on a large scale, both in physical size and in quantity size. But these the prints they were making were much bigger. These were like 6 by 6 feet giant posters, multi-layers with like 5 or 6 different colors. I'm only using 2 colors here to give you a basic idea, a basic understanding what they were doing. But this is how I first came up with, or I didn't come up with this, but I first saw this idea being implemented was that in that exhibition. So this is like a miniature size version of what I'd seen in those posters. And I'm going very quickly to get it done, but you get the basic idea of how it's working. The stencil is basically my guide, and I'm not doing anything freehand. I'm using the stencil as the guide to get the image on there. And then when you're done, all you do is lift your plate up, and you have your prints there. Now I'm printing from the great city of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And unfortunately, during the pandemic, we had an unfortunate, terrible tragedy happen where a police murdered George Floyd. So in honor of that, I created this print. It says, "Viva George, long live George." And hopefully everyone that sees this video will also remember who George Floyd was. And in honor of him, we have this print. Now this print may not be archival because I'm using natural pigments, but it's a fast way to get the idea, get the meaning out and about into the streets in an immediate way. So that's why I like this process, and we need to get this idea out into the streets right now. So thank you. I hope this gave you a good idea of how to do something at home, and stay tuned for more of IGC's other printmakers. They're going to be visiting you at home virtually at this virtual Gabalandia this year.